She held up my repair kit between two fingers like it was something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Good luck with that. 20, the whole kit scuffed and oil-stained, and she dangled it in front of her racing buddies in the dealership techs in their pressed uniforms, and she laughed this bright, cruel little laugh. And she said, "Sweetheart, this is a $3 million Italian automobile. I don't think your little bag of tricks from the gas station is going to do much for it." And everybody chuckled. The way people chuckle when a rich person makes a joke. And I stood there in my coveralls holding my hat and said nothing. And 11 minutes later, the 9-cent washer out of that $20 kit was the only reason that woman was still alive. You fixed it? I'm going to tell you the whole thing, because it's not really a story about a car. It's a story about the small things, the ones nobody important ever looks at. The ones that turn out to be the difference between a regular afternoon and the worst phone call a family ever gets. And it's a story about my little brother, who I'll get to because he's the reason I knew what I was looking at when all those experts didn't. But first, real quick, I'm not going to chase you down. Roadside guys, we don't flag people in. We just keep our lights on and wait for the ones who need what we've got. So I'll just say this. If you're the kind of person who likes a story about the overlooked thing that turns out to matter most, pull over and stay a while and tap that subscribe button so you can find your way back. Now let me tell you who I am, and then let me tell you about that afternoon at the track. My name is Vince Dolan. I'm 43 years old, and I run a one-truck roadside and recovery outfit. Towing, jump starts, breakdowns, the occasional winch out of somebody who put their car somewhere a car shouldn't go. It's me, my truck, and a phone that rings at all hours. And part of how I keep the lights on is a contract with a private racing club out past the county line. A fancy place where wealthy people bring their supercars to drive fast on a closed track on weekends. My job there is recovery and safety. I'm the guy with the truck who hauls your car back to the paddock when it dies on the far turn. The guy standing by in case something goes wrong. To the members of that club, I am about as visible as the asphalt. I'm just the tow guy, the help. I'm a single dad. My boy Charlie is 7. His mom and I split a few years back. She's still in his life. We make it work. But day to day, it's me and Charlie. And that boy is the sun and the moon to me. Half the reason I take the weekend track gig is it pays well enough that Charlie gets to do the things I never got to do as a kid. Little league, a decent bike, a trip to see the ocean last summer that he still talks about. So that's me, a working man with a truck and a kid, and a 7-year-old doing honest work for people who mostly look right through me. And I'll tell you, being looked right through doesn't bother me near as much as you'd think. Because I've got a 7-year-old at home who looks right at me, who thinks his dad with the tow truck is just about the most important man in the world. When you've got that, the opinions of the country club crowd don't weigh much. Charlie thinks my truck is the coolest thing on 4 wheels. He thinks the fact that I can fix anything is a kind of magic. He's got no idea his dad is the help to anybody. And if he ever found out somebody talked to me that way, that boy would be ready to fight a grown man on my behalf. That's the thing money can't buy. And those folks at the track will never have for me. I go home to somebody who knows exactly what I'm worth, so they can look through me all they like. Now, before I tell you about Veronica Lowe and her Lamborghini, I have to tell you about my brother Petey, because you won't understand the rest without him. Petey was my little brother, 4 years younger than me, and I half raised him because our folks worked all the time, and somebody had to. Petey was the good one, funnier than me, kinder than me, the kind of kid everybody loved. And Petey loved cars the way I do, the way that's in your blood. We grew up poor, and being poor teaches you a particular thing about machines that rich people never learn. You can't afford to replace anything, so you learn to fix everything. You learn that a whole car can be brought down by a part that costs less than a candy bar, and that the same car can be saved by the same part if you're the kind of person who knows where to look. Petey and I learned all of that together in a gravel driveway with a hand-me-down toolbox keeping junk running because junk was all we had. I can still see him out there, little Petey, 10 years old, holding the work light for me while I lay under some rusted-out sedan we'd bought for $200. asking me 1,000 questions, wanting to understand how every single piece fit together. He had the gift for it worse than I did, honestly. I was good with my hands, but Petey understood machines, the why of them, the way some people understand music. He used to say a car was just a few hundred small promises all keeping each other, and if any one of them broke, the whole thing came apart. He was right. He was right about it in a way that would end up costing him everything. We didn't have a dad around much, and I was the big brother, so a lot of raising Petey fell to me, and I didn't mind it, not for 1 second. That kid was the best thing in my life before Charlie came along. The two great loves of my life are a son I'd die for and a little brother I'd have died for, and I only got to keep one of them, and I think about that every single day. When Petey was 24, he bought himself a used sports car. Nothing fancy by rich people's standards, but to Petey it was the world, the first nice thing he'd ever owned. The car he'd dreamed about since he was a boy, and he'd taken it to a shop to have some work done, a place that cut a corner. Somebody, somewhere in that shop, did a sloppy job on a fuel fitting, left the wrong part in or left a part out, a little sealing washer, the kind of thing that costs pocket change, the kind of thing nobody bothers to look at twice. And one day, driving on the highway, that fuel fitting let go, and the fuel found the heat, and there was a fire, and I lost my brother, 24 years old, because of a part that cost less than a dime, that the wrong person hadn't bothered to look at. I got the phone call on a Tuesday. I will not walk you through it, because some things a man doesn't put into words even all these years later. And because you don't need the details to understand what it did to me, I'll just tell you that I was the one who had to identify some of his things. And I was the one who had to tell our mother. And I was the one who, weeks later, finally got my hands on the accident report and the inspection of what was left of that car, and read the words that explained it. An improper fuel line seal. 3 words. My whole brother. The funniest, kindest person I ever knew ended by 3 words and a part that cost less than a dime. And here's the thing that nearly broke me. The thing I had to make my peace with. I could have caught it if I'd been the one to look at that car. If Petey had brought it to me instead of that shop, I'd have seen it in a heartbeat. Because seeing it is the one thing in this world I'm truly good at. He didn't bring it to me because he didn't want to bother his big brother. He was being considerate, and it killed him. So you'll forgive me if I don't ever again let politeness or pride or a rich lady's laughing stop me from looking at a car I think is going to hurt somebody. I paid for that lesson with the only brother I had. I don't tell that story much, but you need it because here's what it did to me. After Petey, I became a man who checks the small things. Obsessively, religiously. Every fitting, every washer, every line on every vehicle I touch. Because I know in a way most people are lucky enough to never know exactly what the small, overlooked thing can do. I carry that $20 kit everywhere, not because I'm cheap, but because it's full of the small, cheap parts that save lives. And I have made it my quiet personal mission ever since I buried my brother to never let the thing that killed Petey kill anybody else if I'm standing close enough to stop it. That kit she laughed at, that was my brother's memorial. She just didn't know it. Okay, now I can tell you about that afternoon. It was a club track day, a warm Saturday, the paddock full of the kind of cars that cost more than most people's houses. And the star of the show was a brand new Lamborghini, a $3 million one, a rare track-built model belonging to a member named Veronica Lowe. Veronica Lowe was, by every account, old family money, and she fancied herself a racer. She'd show up on weekends to drive her supercars hard around the club track. And she travelled with an entourage, a couple of friends, and a pair of factory-trained technicians from the high-end dealership who looked after her cars. Men in spotless branded uniforms who carried laptops instead of wrenches. And Veronica Lowe was the kind of wealthy person who had decided somewhere along the way that her money made her better than the people who worked for a living, and she wore that belief openly, like jewelry. That afternoon, her Lamborghini had a little problem. She'd done a couple of warm-up laps and brought it in because something didn't feel right, and there was a faint smell, and a little dampness she'd noticed near the back of the engine. Her two dealership techs had it up on stands and were huddled around their laptops, plugging in their diagnostic computers, frowning at screens.
And I was nearby because that's my job.
When a car comes in acting funny on a track day, the safety and recovery guy pays attention. So I drifted over the way I do, just keeping an eye. And I caught the smell, and the second I caught it, every hair on my body stood up. Because I know that smell. It's the smell that took my brother. It was fuel. A faint, sweet, deadly weep of raw fuel somewhere it shouldn't be, near something hot. And those two factory techs with their laptops were so busy reading error codes off a computer that not one of them had gotten down on the ground and put their nose where mine was telling them to put it. I said, quiet and polite, "Excuse me, you've got a fuel smell back here. You might want to check your fittings before she goes back out." And one of the techs glanced at me, the tow guy, the recovery contractor in coveralls, and gave me a tight little smile and said, "We've run the diagnostics. No fuel system codes. It's probably just some residue burning off. We'll clear her to go back out in a few minutes." And he turned back to his laptop. Because the computer hadn't told him there was a problem, so as far as he was concerned, there wasn't one. That's the disease of a certain kind of expert. They trust the screen over their own senses, over the simple physical truth sitting right in front of them. I want to be fair because I'm not against diagnostics and I'm not against credentials. Those techs probably knew things about that car's software I'll never know. But here's what poverty teaches you that no certification ever will. A machine is a physical thing in the physical world, and it will tell you what's wrong with it through your nose and your fingers and your eyes if you'll only get down on the ground and let it. Rich people repair is about replacing. A code comes up, you swap the whole assembly, you ship the part in from Italy, you charge accordingly. Poor people repair is about understanding, because you can't afford to replace, so you have to actually know. Those two men had spent their careers in a world where the answer was always a new part and a big invoice, and so they'd never had to develop the one skill that was about to matter more than anything else on that asphalt, which was the ability to find the tiny, cheap, broken thing with your own senses. I'd spent my whole life in the other world, and only one of those worlds was going to save Veronica Lowe's life that afternoon. And that's when Veronica Lowe walked over, pulling on her driving gloves, impatient to get back out on the track. And she heard the tail end of it, the tow guy telling her expensive technicians their business. And she looked at me, and she looked at my coveralls. And she gave me that bright, cold smile, and she said, "Is there a problem? My technicians are factory certified. I sincerely doubt the tow truck driver is going to catch something they missed." And I said, as respectfully as I could, because a man's life, her life, was on the line, "Ma'am, I'm not trying to step on anybody, but I smell fuel and you're about to take this car out on a track at very high speed. And if you've got fuel weeping near a hot engine, that is the single most dangerous thing that can happen in a car. I'm asking you, please, just let me take one look before you go back out. 2 minutes. And that's when she did it. She reached over to my truck, where my kit was sitting open, and she picked it up between 2 fingers, my scuffed 20 roadside kit. And she held it up and laughed and said the thing about the gas station and the $3 million Italian automobile. And everybody laughed along, and I stood there and took it. And I'll be honest with you about that second, because it's part of the story. It stings every single time to be made into somebody's joke. I'm 43 years old, and I've been the help my whole working life, and you'd think I'd be numb to it by now, but you never quite are. There's always a little flush of heat up the back of your neck, a little voice that says, "Say something, defend yourself, don't just stand there." And standing in that paddock with all those polished people laughing at my brother's memorial kit, I felt all of that. But I also felt something steadier underneath it, something that has carried me through A lot of humiliations, which is the knowledge that what a person like Veronica Lowe thinks of me has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm actually worth. She was laughing at a man she couldn't see, the real man, the one who knew exactly what was wrong with her car and was about to save her life, was standing right in front of her, completely invisible to her, because she'd already decided what I was. That's not my shame to carry. It's hers. So I let them laugh, and I kept my eyes on the thing that mattered, which was the smell of fuel, and the woman about to go drive into it. But here's the thing she didn't understand. I have buried a brother over exactly this. There is no amount of laughing that was going to make me walk away from that smell. You can humiliate me all day long. I have a high tolerance for being looked down on. I've had a lifetime of practice. What I do not have any tolerance for, none at all, is letting somebody die from the thing that killed Petey while I stand there worried about my pride. So I didn't argue with her anymore. I just got down on the ground. While she was still laughing, while her techs were rolling their eyes, I lay down on that paddock asphalt in my coveralls, and I slid under the back of that $3 million car, and I followed my nose the way Petey and I learned in a gravel driveway 30 years ago. And it took me about 90 seconds to find it, a fuel line where it connected to the engine with a fitting, a banjo bolt we call it.
And that fitting is sealed by a small, soft metal washer, a crush washer that costs about 9 cents. And somebody at some point during some service had used the wrong washer, wrong size, wrong material, didn't seat right. And it had been slowly failing. And now, under the heat and pressure of those warm-up laps, it had started to weep fuel, a thin, glistening, deadly seep of gasoline right next to an engine that at racing speed runs hot enough to set it off in a heartbeat. And I want you to understand what that moment was like for me, lying on my back under $3 million of somebody else's car, because it was one of the strangest and most terrible moments of my life. Because I wasn't just looking at a fuel leak.
I was looking at the exact thing that killed my brother. The same fitting, the same wrong little washer, the same slow weep that nobody important had bothered to look at. It was like the worst day of my life had reached forward 30 years and laid itself out under that fancy car for me to find. And for one cold second, I was 20-something again, getting the phone call, reading the 3 words in the report. And then the second passed, and something hard and clear came over me. The thing that comes over you when the people you love are in danger, except this time the person in danger was a stranger who just humiliated me. And it didn't matter even a little, because I had been given the one thing I'd prayed for at my brother's funeral. A chance to be standing close enough, this time, to stop it. I was not going to waste it. Not for my pride, not for her laughing, not for anything. If Veronica Lowe had taken that car back out on that track, the way she was about to, her certified technicians were about to let her, that fitting would have let go at 150 miles an hour, and that fuel would have found that heat, and there would have been a fire at speed in a closed cockpit. She would have died the exact way my brother died. I have no doubt about it whatsoever. None. I slid back out from under the car, and I must have had a look on my face because the laughing had stopped, and I held up the wrong washer I'd just removed, this tiny, corroded little ring, and I said, "This is a 9-cent sealing washer. It's the wrong one. It's been failing, and it's weeping fuel 6 inches from your exhaust."
If you had taken this car back out on that track, Mum, you would not have come back. This would have caught fire at speed. I'd bet my life on it. And my voice caught, which surprised me. After all these years, I've seen exactly this before. And I reached into that $20 kit, the one she'd just laughed at, and I took out a little envelope of crush washers, and I found the right one, 9 cents, correct size, correct soft copper, and I got back under the car, and I seated it properly. And I torqued that fitting down to spec. And I slid back out and I wiped my hands and I said, "Now it's safe. You can have your techs verify it, but that car would have killed you today." Nobody was laughing now. Veronica Lowe's two factory technicians came and looked and got down on the ground where I'd been, finally, and one of them went pale, and I heard him quietly say to the other, "He's right. The washer's wrong. How did the diagnostics not?" And the other one didn't answer because there was no good answer.
The computer doesn't smell fuel. The computer doesn't know what a dying crush washer looks like at a glance. Only a man who's been taught by tragedy knows that. And Veronica Lowe stood there holding her driving gloves, staring at that tiny corroded washer in my palm, and I watched the whole thing fall on her. The understanding of what had almost happened, of how close she'd come in the next 10 minutes to being gone, and of who had stopped it. Not her certified experts with their laptops, not her money, but the tow truck driver she'd just humiliated for sport in front of all her friends using a kit she'd called a bag of gas station tricks. She got very quiet, and then her face started to come apart, the way a person's does when the fear hits them a few seconds after the danger's past, and she said, in a completely different voice than the one she'd been using all day, a small voice. I was about to drive it. I was going to do another 20 laps, and I said, "I know, that's why I wouldn't let it go." And she looked at the washer, and then she looked at me, and she said, You knew. The second you smelled it, you knew. How did you know?" And that's when I told her about Petey. I didn't plan to. It's not something I go around telling rich strangers in paddocks, but she asked me how I knew, with the danger still cold in both our chests, and the truth just came out. I told her I had a little brother named Petey, who I half-raised, who was the best of us, and I told her that when he was 24, a shop left the wrong part in a fuel fitting on his car. A little washer, the kind nobody looks at, and that it let go on the highway, and that there was a fire, and that I lost him. And I told her that ever since I have checked the small things on every car I touch, and I have carried this $20 kit full of 9-cent parts everywhere I go, because I made my brother a promise at his funeral that what got him would never get anybody else if I was close enough to stop it. And I told her, "So when I smelled fuel on your car today, Mom, you couldn't have paid me enough to walk away. I wasn't going to let it happen to another family, not while I was standing right here." And Veronica Lowe, the heiress, the racer, the woman who'd held up my kit and laughed, put a hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled up, and she said, "Oh my God, and I laughed at you. I held up the thing that, and I laughed at you." And she started to cry, right there in the paddock, in front of her friends and her useless, certified technicians, this woman who an hour earlier had thought she was so far above me she could use me for entertainment, because she understood, finally and completely, that the man she'd treated like dirt had just saved her life out of a wound she couldn't begin to imagine, and had asked her nothing, and would have done it even if she'd laughed twice as hard. I've thought a lot about why it hit her so hard, harder than just the fear of the near miss, and I think it's this. When you spend your whole life believing that the world sorts neatly into important people and unimportant people, and that you're safely among the important ones, you build your whole sense of yourself on that sorting. And then one afternoon, the unimportant person, the one you literally used as a prop for a joke, turns out to be the only thing standing between you and death, and he does it without anger, without making you grovel, without taking a dime for it, and the whole sorting collapses.
Everything you believed about who matters and who doesn't just falls down in a heap on the asphalt. That's not an easy thing to have happen to you in front of all your friends. It's a kind of mercy, but a hard one, the kind that breaks you open before clears throat. It does you any good. I watched it break Veronica Lowe open right there in that paddock, and I didn't enjoy it the way maybe a smaller man would have. I just felt sorry for her and sorry for myself. And most of all, I missed my brother, who was the reason all of us were getting to feel anything at all. Now here's the part where you might expect a big reward. The grateful billionaire writes the humble hero a fat check. And I want to tell you honestly how that part actually went, because it didn't go the way those stories usually go. She tried. Of course she tried.
Once she'd collected herself, Veronica Lowe took out her checkbook right there, hands still shaking, and she started to write, and she said, there's no amount that please let me. And I stopped her. I put my hand over the checkbook, gentle, and I closed it. And I said, "Ma'am, no, thank you, but no, I didn't do this for money. If I take a check for this, then it becomes a transaction, and it wasn't a transaction. It was me keeping a promise to my brother. You can't pay me for that. I'd be ashamed to let you try." Because here's the truth, and I needed her to hear it. A check would have made it smaller. It would have turned the most sacred thing I do, the thing I do for Petey, into a tip from a rich lady to the help. And I would rather have stayed poor my whole life than let that happen. Some things you cannot be paid for without losing them. I know that's a hard thing for some folks to understand, especially folks who could use the money, and believe me, I could have used it. I'm a one-truck operation raising a boy on my own. A check from a woman like Veronica Lowe could have changed my whole life, paid off the truck, set Charlie up. There was a voice in me that said, "Take it, you fool. You've earned it 10 times over. Think of your son." But I've learned that there are a few things in a life that are worth more than money, and that if you sell them, you can never buy them back at any price. What I did for Petey out there is one of those things. It belongs to him. If I'd cashed a check for it, every time I looked at the money, I'd have known I'd put a price on my brother's memory. And no amount would have been anything but an insult once I thought about it that way. So I kept my dignity and I kept Petey, and I went home to my son a poorer man and a whole one. I've never once regretted it. There are richer ways to be poor than most wealthy people will ever understand. But I'll tell you what I did say to her. I said, "If you really want to do something, don't do it for me.
Do it for Petey. There are working people out there right now driving cars with the wrong cheap part in them, the same as my brother, the same as you almost did today, and they'll never have a certified technician or a guy like me standing close enough to catch it. If you've got money you don't know what to do with, do something about that." And I picked up my kit, the famous $20 kit, and I put it back in my truck, and I went back to work, because there were other cars on that track that needed a recovery guy keeping an eye on them. And here's what Veronica Lowe did, and it's the reason I'm willing to tell this story. She listened. She actually listened. A few weeks later, she called me, tracked down my little one truck number, and she told me she'd been thinking about Petey every day, and that she wanted to set something up, and she wanted my blessing and my help to do it right. And she did. She started a foundation with real money behind it that runs free vehicle safety inspections for working families, the people who can't afford the dealership, who drive the old cars with the cheap parts, the people most likely to have a Petey in their future and never see it coming. Free inspections, trained people who actually get under the car and look. And she named it after my brother, the Pete Dolan Fund.
My little brother's name on a thing that's going to save people's lives for years because of a 9-cent washer, and the worst day of my life finally being put to some use. You have no idea what it does to a grieving man to see his dead brother's name on something good. For years, Petey was just a hole in my life, an absence, a thing that happened to me. And now his name is on a van that pulls up to a working family's driveway and finds the bad part before it finds them. Petey saves somebody every few weeks now, all these years after he's gone. My funny, kind, machine-loving little brother is still out there keeping people's small promises from breaking. I can't tell you what that's worth to me. There isn't a checkbook big enough. Veronica, hello I should tell you, is a different person now. Not perfect, and people don't become perfect, well, but different. She told me the last time we talked that for her whole life she'd believed the important people were the ones with money and credentials, and that it took a tow truck driver lying on the asphalt under her car to teach her that the most important person in any room is usually the one nobody's looking at. She doesn't laugh at working people anymore. I know that for a fact. Something got rearranged in her that afternoon, and I think it's permanent. And me? I went home that night to my boy Charlie, 7 years old, waiting up past his bedtime with the sitter, and he ran at me the way he does, and I picked him up and held him maybe a little tighter than usual because I'd spent my afternoon standing very close to the thing that took my brother, and it makes you want to hold your people. And Charlie said, "Did you have a good day at the track, Dad?" And I thought about all of it. The laughing, the kit, the washer, the fire that didn't happen, Petey, the fund with my brother's name on it. And I said, "Yeah, buddy, I think I did some good today. I think Uncle Petey would have been proud of me." And Charlie, who knows about his Uncle Petey, who he never got to meet, said, "Tell me the good thing you did." And so I sat on the edge of his bed and I told him a version of it, the kind you tell a 7-year-old, about how the small things matter and how Daddy caught one. And he fell asleep about halfway through. And I sat there in the dark a while, just being grateful. I think about that afternoon a lot, about how the whole world is set up to make us believe that value lives in the big, expensive, obvious things, the $3 million car, the certified experts, the laptops, the money, and how the actual difference between life and death that day was a 9-cent washer and a man in coveralls who'd been taught by grief to look where nobody else bothered to look. Veronica Lowe had every advantage money could buy parked in that paddock, and not one of them could see what was about to kill her. The only thing standing between her and a fire was the person she'd decided was beneath her notice. That's the thing I most want you to take from this, whoever you are out there. The most important things are almost always small and quiet and easy to overlook. And the most important people very often are, too. The 9-cent washer holds back the fire. The tow truck guy sees what the experts miss. The little brother you half raised teaches you through the worst loss of your life how to save a stranger 30 years later. Look at the small things. Look at the overlooked people. There is more riding on them than anybody important ever realizes, so that's my story. A rich woman laughed at my $20 kit, and 11 minutes later, a 9-cent washer out of it was the only reason she went home to her family that night. And my brother Petey, gone all these years, reached out through me and through that little washer and saved a stranger's life and got his name put on something that'll go on saving lives long after all of us are done. Trust me, Petey, we did some good. Here's my question for you before you pull back out onto the road. Who's the overlooked person in your life who turned out to matter most? The one nobody else gave a second look, who saw what everybody missed, who showed up when it counted. Go down to the and tell me about them. Say their name out loud. The overlooked ones deserve to be named. Like, share, and subscribe my channel.